welcome to the House of ZK Radio, which is a focused podcast and media channel exploring everything ZK, zero knowledge. I'm Alice, a host of House of ZK Radio and also education lead at ZKM. I'm joined here today with Sylve, who is co-founder of Hylé, and also Ming, who's our chief scientist at ZKM. This episode, just as some context, is a continuation of a panel discussion called Will ZK Be Bigger Than Blockchain that took place in ZK Hub at DevCon a couple of months ago. We'll be focusing more on the philosophy behind ZK in this. And to start off, I remember, Ming, in the panel, you described blockchains as these siloed universes and ZK as a medium to act as an interoperability layer, or interoperability mechanism between these different blockchains. And each kind of blockchain ecosystem representing its own universe, so upholding different philosophies, upholding different standards in, say, governance and decentralization. How does the multiverse analogy that you used relate to, say, some concepts that we see in pluralism, where we can have coexisting truths? There's no like single kind of truth that dominates everything. Could ZK serve as that interoperable truth in this pluralistic world? And what are some implications of this happening?
Yeah, sure. I think this will have great impact on how we operate in our daily lives, because our society are organized in a, I would say, quite centralized way. So there's a single truth. Well, that's the belief, and our legal systems, our societies are sort of arranged along these beliefs. So we have like in a modern world, we have a single institution, and our law should all like derived from this one institution. I'm sorry, constitution. And so these principles, right? So the governance depend on that you have a single truth, right? You recognize there are other truths, and then so you negotiate like treaties and things like that. But a plural world, meaning like fundamentally, there are many truths or many versions of truths that you have to respect. Each version of the truth or individual truths that may be totally irrelevant or uh, even in conflict. So how do we live in such a world, a true plural world? I think the only principle I think is then you have to be true to yourself, right? So you present your truth and you negotiate with other truths and to sort of coexist. I think this is the fundamental change that this kind of technology enables.
Absolutely. And I like how you mentioned that, in our traditional systems nowadays, the status quo is that our governance depends on a single truth from these centralized entities, like, for example, a single truth deriving from a law. But now that we're, say, if we are entering a world that's more plural, we have to consider different versions of truth. And the way to do that is to be true to yourself. So just going off of that, Sylve, you mentioned also in the panel about how ZK opens up a new spectrum of trust between full trust and also trustlessness. So like full trust, like what we see in our traditional systems today, trustlessness, like what we're trying to aim for blockchains. But ZK offers different kinds of shades, as you put it, 50 shades of trust. So I'm wondering if you can speak more about how this can alter our traditional understanding of trust in our current systems that we use. And in enabling this kind of middle ground between these extremes, how will that impact our societal structures or governance methods or even personal relationships that we have in between each other, so both at the individual and the societal levels?
I think it's a really good question to ask, and it's one of these. When you started looking at things from like a technological standpoint, when you look at ZK, like, oh, I'm able to do this thing, and then you start to look at how things currently work, and you ask yourself, wait, how is it currently working? Like it puts you in a different perspective. You look at something like Bitcoin, and you say, oh, these transactions are immutable. Like a transaction that went through is done and there's no way to go back in time, and then you start questioning, well, it's really fun because it doesn't seem that there's a lot of things in the world that have this property of what Josh Stark calls hardness, of things that don't change, of it has like this sort of property as if like when you drop something you know that it's going to fall. It's like physics. These things you can really trust. And I think if I hadn't gone into technology, one area that I've always really loved is law, because the fun thing with law is that it's absolutely everywhere. Every single interaction that you have is regulated, and there's a contract. Like whenever everything is a contract, and everything is mediated through that. And the fun thing that I realized, like as I had like some law classes and everything else, is that you realize that the law is very monopolistic, and that has not always necessarily been the case. So in Europe, in particular, we love to think about the Middle Ages as a horrible time where everyone was under a sovereign king, but it was a very decentralized time. And one of my favorite pieces of trivia from like the 13th or 14th century was that you had very like a lot of competing standards for law, and you also had competing standards for coinage. So you had people who were selling their money, and because they were trusted merchants, they would go around different fairs and different villages and sell their coins. And because they were reputable um, merchants, you trust their coinage. You trust that they actually put the right amount of silver or gold inside their coins. And so I've always been very interested in this idea of how do you allow people to create norms? How do you allow people to contractualize? And I think the first time I really fell in love with this idea, where I really realized what blockchain could give there, was oddly enough NFTs, because it's fairly the art market is regulated by IP law, and in order for you to sell something, like it needs to be represented as something that you can commercialize within the realm of IP law or the in the art market. And when I studied art market, I was wondering, like, I was looking at an art piece which was a video, and I thought, okay, that's actually pretty cool. Like it was a guy going up a pool and then jumping into the pool, and it was like a loop, basically a GIF. And I was wondering, that's really cool. How do I buy that? How does that work? And then I realized that in order to buy it, you needed to like clear the standard for it to become an asset. And for that to become an asset, you need to have like a whole installation. You need to have like a physical TV that would hold it, but you wouldn't not able to sell the file. You had no way of doing it. And what NFTs give you is that it lowers tremendously the cost of things to be contractualized about or commercialized. And suddenly you went from like, okay, this thing has to cost like 4K because you need a whole installation and you need to talk to a lawyer, to, okay, it costs maybe $5 to go on chain and mint it. And so you tremendously lower the cost of creating norms. And so you allow people to interact on top of that. And that's something that really interests me. I think blockchains are truth making machines or norm making machines. And that's a very desirable outcome. And I think ZK, and I'm happy we're talking about that, I think it really extends that property even more.
Definitely. And really like how you gave that example for NFTs as a kind of a medium for lowering that cost of creating those new norms. Ming, I'm wondering if you have any other kinds of thoughts that you'd like to add to this.
Oh, yes. I like this topic very much. I'm also very interested in history, and then you see all kinds of societies, how they operate, and they have differences, and they have, like Sally said, it's norms, common, traits. And I think um, you observe all these societies, ancient ones, recent ones. they all kind of involved laws, contracts, and of course exchanges. And also these also connect very um, much on the way we do commerce. For example, how money was invented. All society, how they all have the concept of money. They developed independently, even though they well, we all know human came from like a same origin, but they live in remote places that not easily connected. Most people don't see a stranger like outside of their village, right? They don't travel. I heard like 5 miles. Most of the people that not like today, right? So they just humans are very isolated, for most of the time, and they all independently develop these ideas, right? They have shell, they have even stones for money, but they all have the concept of that. And I think NFT is the idea of a immutable contract, I think. So you can have everything into a NFT, right? You just have to uh, be true to one version of it. So that's you can fake many things. You can fake a contract. You can fake a lot of things. So that's one thing that blockchain can sort of solve this problem of trust. So trust is I think uh, s- it's not an individual thing. So if there's just, you know, everyone's being themselves, right? You are true to yourself. So there's no problem of trust. Trust is always between group of people. And I think that the technology that we develop, this blockchain, kind of make trust a uh, thing that can be programmed. So I would call blockchain the great trust machine. And the one thing about machines is that they can be programmed, and trust can be programmed. I really like the 50 Shades of Trust, and that means like you can uh, operate them. You can even program them, right? Then this never happened before. Trust is a very expensive thing in the past. So I think these concepts, these ideas, make it trust a thing that can be operated on, can be programmed, and that will greatly uh, enhance the way we interact. So yeah, so that's what I think.
A really good book and something that really like pilled me on this idea was The Mystery of Capital by an economist called De Soto, which analyzes and is asking the question of where's why isn't capitalism always the solution in some countries where you had like sweeping liberalization actions in South America and it didn't seem to really like lift poverty off. It's like, but it's a great tool. You can use capital. You can like have a house and use it as collateral to have a credit, and then you can buy new things and maybe start a business. Like, why didn't that work? And he had a very, very elegant analysis about the fact that some things were not considered within the realm of commerce. So he goes around like favelas in South America, and he's like, which house does this belong to? Like, which house does this belong to? And he realizes that there's informal ways of that people have to know how much their house is worth and who owns the house. But you didn't have, but this worked because it's localized. Like, you know that the 200 people living in that neighborhood all agree that that person owns that house. But if you go like a mile away, I have no clue who owns this house. And if I look at the government records, the nothing tells me whose house it is, and therefore I cannot trust that. And it was a very interesting book saying if you had a way to represent these intersubjectivities, like these networks of truth, like link them with each other and make sure that they can be integrated in something bigger, like you could have access to more capital. And this could be very useful. He said, but these are, I think he called them like debt capital, things that cannot be used outside of their own little realm. And that's the great thing about like the dollar, for example. The dollar is a fantastic API for value. You know that people are always going to be accepting the dollar. but it's much more difficult to use like your house in a favela as collateral. And so the thing that I really like about attested data is that one way that we try to solve this problem of intersubjectivity is to say, okay, we're just going to put everything on chain. If everything runs on the blockchain, then there's no problem because everything is laid bare and is transparent, and therefore you can create DeFi about it, you can create more things about it. But what the past like 15 years of blockchains have shown us is that we haven't managed to put everything on chain. It's not performant enough, and there are just things that were never bridged. There are still things that are gonna stay in the real world. And what I really love about ZK is that it's this ability to use attested data to produce statements about them. And so you can, like this example of that, the favela, like if 200 people decide to trust that this house belongs to that person, like they can collectively sign this fact. And so if you trust that group, you're able to extend that fact somewhere else. Like, oh, I have like the proof that this person has this house, and it is attested by whom? By this group of people. And you're able to have like things like transitive trust. If I trust you 80% and you trust that person 80%, then I will trust you like by the factor of 80% of 80%. And that's really cool. I think that's why I talk about like 50 Shades of Trust, about having this ability to have things that are not truthful and not trustless. You've got something in between, and I think that's really neat.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I really liked how you also mentioned kind of a way where we need to link these different networks of truth, because a lot of these networks are very local based, like they're only applicable to, say, maybe a small community or just even a couple of people. But we can use these different tools, like for example, with ZK, as you say, it's a very like powerful way to produce statements of these kinds of attested data, and that in of itself can act as a link. And also, Ming, what you said as trust being programmable, and how we can use, both you and Sylve mentioned blockchains as these trusts and also these norm-making machines. I think that we're entering into this new era. It's very exciting. So I wanted to also ask you both about some of the broader implications that you see from shifting to these different trust models. So we traditionally have that legal enforcement of trust, or those that are, say, reputation-based, like Sylve, I remember you mentioned about the coinage example. So that shift from that traditional form of trust to mathematically provable trust that can be enabled with things like ZK. So I'm wondering if you both can speak more about some of those implications in shifting to that truth, to a different truth model. And I found this kind of akin almost to like during Enlightenment. So during that period where we saw that truth can now be derived from logic, from breaking down into reasonings, as opposed to just inherited beliefs or things that other people tell upon us. Wondering if there's any parallels between there too. And as a follow-up to that, in having this shift to this mathematically provable trust model, do you believe we're entering a new era of trust where the provability of this knowledge matters more than its original source, matters more than, say, like an inherited belief that someone just enforces upon us, or just a single law that is just set upon us? And how do you think this can redefine our current models in terms of trust?
Should I begin? Okay. Yes, I think this is very similar to, let's say, internet, right? We can call it the internet of trust, right? So it's the trust is trust based off like mathematical proof, right? It won't depend or sort of rooted in who you are, your color of your skin, who other the things like traditionally, very much tied into trust, right? This person is trustworthy, if it's from this echelon of society, right? Like your class, your so those things, right? We want to decouple trust from that. So this is very much like the how internet operates, right? If you can uh, prove that you have certain uh, you know amount of ability to compute, you're in, right? This is like the Bitcoin, right? It's just one vote, one CPU means that anything other than that won't matter. So, and also I think now tackling back to what you said about the different the economies in different places. For example, in I wouldn't I wouldn't judge other economies, but the rent of a global currency, for example, like dollar, uh, obviously greatly increase the uh, volume of commerce because we have a common medium to trade upon. But this also means society to lose control over how they dealt with each other, right? So if we all operate on currency that's not related to us, right? It's decided by something far away. Like I am amazed that even in science fiction or like these uh, dramas, like for example in Star Wars, you know, universe, they also have a universal currency called like the credit. We don't know what it's just called the credit. So it will work even across like within the galaxy. Different worlds. They just know this credit, and if you don't get that credit, I would think if you're isolated on a planet and you don't have that credit from like a central, galactical government, you know, light years away. How do you do commerce, right? You're strangled in this planet, and there's no credit, right? Yeah. So there's a problem with that as well. So one hand we need this very convenient common currency. Uh, that's kind of like the singular. That must be the most trusted entity, right? Truth. On the other hand, it will mean many communities will lose certain amount of freedom, right? Your financial freedom, right? Your village, will lose a lot of control or even convenience from time to time if you don't have that, right? You, for some reason, you just don't have enough credit. I think this is the case for even like in our world, right? For example, I don't dare to judge. I'm not a economist, but I'm as I look into like for example Argentina, right? This is a country that's just like enormous resource, right? But they're sort of just being in this spiral I don't know like chaos because they have trouble with this currency, right? Their own currency was sort of shattered, uh, and this foreign currency don't have any control of it. So yeah, I think
It was one of
uh,
the one of the best The Economist article I've ever read. I think it was from like 5, 10 years ago, and it was something like the worst fate for a country is not to be like Greece and just like fail overnight, but rather to be like Argentina, go for like top 5 powerful countries and best places to live on earth in the beginning of the 20th, to just barreling down with because of hyperinflation and
right, yeah.
cronyism.
Anyway, so I think I wouldn't say like cryptocurrency or blockchain can save economy like Argentina, but I think if you have a balanced economy that a different, like you said, like a programmable or different shades of trust, firmly established within the society. So then you wouldn't have those kind of like problems. You would have like exploit because I'm sure this debt situation of these countries are exploited by people lending the money, right? You know, you would say these people who owned a lot of by by economy like Argentina. They're the stupidest, but that must be not be why their lend again, right? There's profit to be made by lending anyway, and exploit it. So I would think, a different model of trust that can establish the stability and also, let's say, self governance or autonomy, a balanced system based off these, technologies would, I think, would be better off than the chaotic, situation created by a very, let's say, very inflexible and you know system that we have. Yeah.
I think
So
I like having blockchain as like a, because it's an engine for pluralism. It means that you can have different methods to, or you can maybe speed up the rate of experimentation about money or about currency, because it was always the same thing whenever I was like talking about cryptocurrencies to my friends like 10 years ago. They were always, I have PayPal. Like, why would I need this? Like, oh, because you have PayPal because you have 400 years of legal history, and you have banks, and you have IT systems that make it possible. What this allows you to do is rebuild this whole thing in like 4,000 lines of code. And that is incredible. Like, if you're able to speedrun 400 years of commerce to get there in a simpler way, like, what else can you build on top of that? And I think that has really led people, especially in cryptocurrency rather than like blockchain in general, or like the internet of money rather than the decentralized computer part of blockchain, to think that, oh, we've solved the problem. We're just going to have like this machine that is never going to change, and there's going to be 21 million Bitcoin, and everything should run on Bitcoin. And I'm not, I don't think that's such a good idea. Because there's no, and I think that's also something that is very crude in terms of, in an intellectual sense, in the blockchain space, where people think, oh yeah, just have 21 million, therefore you don't have any inflation, therefore you have no problem. And it's fitting, because Bitcoin was born out of the cypherpunk movement. There's always been like a lot of libertarian thoughts in there, and I've been guilty of feeling that way when I was 15. But then you grow up and you realize that, hey, actually, it's great that there's democratic oversight over a currency. It is great that in certain cases you need to devalue it. It is great that sometimes you can change the flow of money. Sometimes, obviously, it can be it's a lever that can be, it's a tool, but it obviously can be used in bad ways. But the result was that in 2008 we were so scared of this lever being used the wrong way that we just decided that, okay, let's have the lever disappear and let's just not use this. And so we end up with trustlessness, and we thought we had solved all the issues, and so we created this tiny little island in the middle of the Pacific where everything is well and dandy, and we thought, hey, if everyone moves over to this tiny little island in the middle of the Pacific, everything will be great. And the past 15 years have shown us that no one wants to live on the tiny little island in the Pacific. People want to live in their own city, in Berlin, in Hong Kong, like wherever they are, and use the currencies that they have. And that's why you see a lot of debates about, oh, but people should be using ETH, or people should be like using native cryptocurrencies rather than stable coins. Like these are bad. These come back from like the real world where I have no bags and have no control. But these are great. These are fantastic. There was a standard for, I think it was called ERC20C or something, like 1 or 2 years back, which was proposed by a team at Stanford that said, oh, how about we have an option on the ERC20 standard, like for token transfers, that would allow rolling back, which is a great feature. Like, I would give this to my parents. I would have this for myself. I would be very happy to have a way to like call them up and say, yo, sorry, I've made a mistake. I would like to roll it back. And they got lambasted about, this is not what blockchain should be about. Blockchain should be about pure absolute trustlessness, and if you fat finger, that's your problem, which is a statement that people usually have until they fat finger themselves and send $2,000 to a random address and they can never get back. it is great to have these fail safes in place, and that's what's great about cryptocurrency. You have the option, but the one thing that I would really argue for is the baseline shouldn't necessarily. It's great that you have the option, perfect. Not everyone is going to want to have the tinfoil hat on. It's great that you're able to do this, but this should not be the benchmark for everyone. It is great that people have different options. And if you're very happy with the hardware wallet and the 24 words buried in your backyard, good for you. But most people are going to want to use banks.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And yeah, I think um, I'm a very excited the first when Bitcoin came out. But I was still think that the implication of Bitcoin is that it brought us this idea of decentralized trust or trustless trust. But other than that, as a economic measure, I think, yeah, there's still more to be desired. That's why I'm firmly in the camp of like you mentioned, pluralism. I think more than one blockchain is definitely needed, warranted in our world because when you have 21 million, right? That's against, yeah, there's no inflation. But then without inflation, there's also no growth. There's no community, right? So I would think 50 years from now, not even that, most of so um around that time, no one mines. Well, they're still mining, right? Like, it takes we value it takes a lot of enormous amount of energy to mine that last Bitcoin, right? So most of the Bitcoin, it will so we're actually getting there. How many Bitcoins have we mined? 17 million already. So most of the Bitcoins are already mined. So Bitcoin is not mined anymore. So this original idea of everyone, has one vote thing is almost evaporated completely. So it's very similar in a society that uh, most of the wealth was, you know, uh, not in the hands of the most of the people. So how do you deal with that, right? It's very inflexible to do any economic policy, with this kind of like a currency. So we need more. We'll probably need. This is probably quite radical. So we need a new Bitcoin at maybe every 20 years, right? People can
I
mine from,
agree.
yeah,
It's going
something
to be
like that.
a fun situation that they end up in, like based on economic incentives. At some point, like it's not going to be worth it to continue mining, and transaction fees on Bitcoin are not high enough that it makes sense to secure the network anymore. So there's going to be an issue there. And the magnificent Rube Goldberg machine of 21 million is a great meme. It's fantastic. It does great, but it also has to change, which is also a great thing that we're able to build more stuff. So I'm really happy. I mean, it's good to talk about these things because it is always a fringe of the blockchain space that is always very adamant,
Yeah.
radical, and it's always like, oh, I told you so 15 years ago. It's like, oh, if you had bought
Yeah,
Bitcoin
we're,
in
we're all
2008.
radicals. Yeah, we're all radical when we're young. And then it's funny because there's this one, um, I forgot his name. He has a very famous saying that just leave one Bitcoin for a kid, right? Then I'm thinking that world, right? I want my kid to be able to mine Bitcoin, to be like a radical, be himself, decide things, not that always rely on the things that he inherited, right? So
Mm.
yeah. Hmm.
So about one of the things, and I'd love to have your opinion on that. I think the crux of the issue with blockchain, like one of the core problem was it's a great thing, it's a great norm making machine, but it's a very um, short sighted machine that can only understand whatever the machine understands. So whatever is on the tiny island in the Pacific can be reasoned about, can be computed over, and that's fantastic. But that only works for blockchain native things. And so you end up in this question of, okay, how do we make sense of this with the rest of the value and the rest of the information that is outside of the blockchain. It's a very isolated and autistic environment that understands itself. But how do you how does this relate with the rest of the world? And so you end up with bridges and oracles, and you end up in the horrible world of reality where, oh, what do you mean there has to be bridges and people bridging money over? And it's like, you give me $100 and I give you like 99 stable coins on the other side of the bridge, and there needs to be someone managing that between blockchain and the real world. And so where I believe that blockchain really, ZK really shines is in making sure that it is not adding more trust assumptions on top of the attestation, basically. So if you have, like, if I have a passport and I am able to produce a zero-knowledge proof that I'm a French citizen, that's a cryptographic statement. The proof is not putting more trust assumptions on top of that. And that's something I can directly boot in the blockchain machine, and that's something that the blockchain machine is able to parse and understand and use without adding any other trust assumption. And I think that's a very good thing. It's like you are not putting like shitty pipes on the thing. It's directly from like attestation to blockchain machine, and that's really, really useful. I think that's the most useful thing that we have for ZK. And I mean, in development you have this thing like garbage in, garbage out. Obviously, if you have a shit attestation, it is going to be a shit proof. The proof itself is not going to change anything. If the government's key leak and you end up with a fake passport, you will be able to create a fake proof. That's a given. But that's a good thing. Like, it's actually a feature that there is no additional trust assumption, garbage in, garbage out. But if you trust the original attestation, then you're good to go.
Yeah, I think you touched on a main, let's say, like a feature of ZK is that it can extend this very isolated mechanism like blockchain to the real world, right? So the truth about the real world, can be made into a proof, um, and then you can have, let's say, like assets or contracts like outside of blockchain, right? Outside of just a cryptographic like curve or anything. Like oracles can be made into ZK proof. But of course, right, the truthfulness of the original thing, you cannot be determined by the proof itself, right? It's just, like you said, garbage in, garbage out. You have uh, a mathematical proof of a garbage is still garbage, right? Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. But this kind of ability extends the original reach of blockchain. So I think that's the very excited feature of ZK that brings to blockchain. So blockchain wouldn't be just an isolated technology; it can connect with the real world. And I think let me add that the community is also very important. So with cryptocurrency, we have this thing called the global consensus, right? A global truth. Uh, and any descent on that truth will cause like a fork in the blockchain. But with ZK, with community, we can have, I call them like fractal consensus, where you can have different truths be coexist on the blockchain, and there won't be a fork because that they're not related, or they can be related not 100%. And with that, you know you can have like assets, the very complicated like assets that you can sort of put your policies, you can put ways of understanding, all these things that's kind of beyond the original scope of just the cryptocurrency. And that would I think that would just providing tools, right? You will still have bad things happening if the original truth is questionable, but at least you have the tools to incorporate real world economy mechanisms into blockchain. Yeah, that's what I think.
I'm really bullish about that. I'm I'm all in.
Absolutely. And going off of what You both were stating about ZK's place on where it really shines. So, Sylve, you mentioning that one of the main value propositions is that we don't have to add any additional trust assumptions on top of our attestations. And Ming, you mentioned that we can now have a connector extend the reach of blockchain beyond its own isolated, siloed kind of island. But I was wondering, for both of you, are there any limitations to this? Could they potentially become a tool of control if, say, if it was implemented or used by a centralized system, an authoritarian kind of system? Would we have, say, some challenges with an unequal access to those who can generate proofs, or specific groups of people deciding the conditions under which proofs are being required? Do you see any potential challenges, even though ZK is a very lovely tool, to say extend the reach of blockchain, to provide a proof for any sort of statement? But in doing so, if it lands in the wrong hands, do we expect any sorts of issues that may arise? And what are potentially maybe some solutions to counteract those potential challenges?
One thing that I've realized with ZK is that it makes possible the creation of boundaries very easily. For example, at DevCon, you could get a discount if you could prove that you were from Southeast Asian country. So you would generate a proof from your passport that you're from a Southeast Asian country, and you're able to get in. So it's a bit like a way to delineate a circle and decide like who's in and who's out. And that's for a really good reason. And honestly, that was a really perfect example. Otherwise, you would need costly KYC. So it reduces the cost of discrimination. And when you start looking at it this way, you realize that, damn, that doesn't sound so great. Does it mean I'm able to discriminate people more easily? Is the cost of the marginal racist act going to zero? And that's pretty odd, because the more attestation you have, because what kind of limitations do we have? ZK extends attestations, extends signatures. And so if we're going into a world where you start to sign more things, it means you can obviously extend them, reason over them, commercialize them. If, for example, in France, we have a signature standard called 2D Doc, which signs a lot of official documents. So your tax income reports are signed, your utility bills are signed, which is really good. You can attest to their veracity, which is really useful. But then you can maybe get into a situation where, in order to get to any type of internet service in France, they're going to be geofenced. And you will to constantly have to prove that you can be let in the inside group, because we have the technology to make that more palatable or easier. So one thing that I'm thinking about is, if we start signing more things, we may end up in a situation where you're just going to have to constantly prove and show something that makes it so that you can be let in the circle. This ability to delineate and create boundaries is fantastic. It's really great. It's a great tool. But at the same time, when you really lay it out, it's a way to discriminate more easily. And that's pretty fucked also.
Yeah, I think this is one of the central tenet of what I described in DAC economy, is that a world that centralized world depends on identity. You should understand, realize that identity is boundary, right? Boundary create, when you have a boundary, you need identity, and so no technology can change that, right? And only in concept, So so I think maybe we need to accommodate that the world has the technology to be more to boundary enhanced world is, like you said, is very bad. So I think I propose that we don't rely on identity anymore. Like we're all humans, and we should replace it with something called individuality, where you go around the world in community, right? So you obviously have your own community, and you can also interact with other communities, and everything's negotiated. And the technology facilitates this interaction because it's not viable without technology before. That's why people create boundaries in the first place. But now, where we, with the internet, we sort of all understand each other. We understand we're one human race in this one blue dot in the in the universe. So it's borders doesn't really I'm radical in this sense, but I think people realize that borders doesn't really mean as it used to be, right? Used to be people don't know that someone's approaching is like a a raiding force, but now like we all know like um we live in this world. It's everything is people on the internet listen to same group of songs or funny videos, cat cat pictures. So yeah, we should be taking off walls, borders, boundaries. Yeah. So I don't want to see like these technology be just enhancing or strengthens borders everywhere. Yeah, that's a nightmarish world I don't want to live in.
I think there may be some interesting bits to that, and it's a line of reasoning that I get from both Arnaud Schenk from the Aztec team and from the Tonk.gg team, like Baz and Goblin Notes. Something that I've reread the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace by Perry Barlow, which was written in like the 80s in Davos. And he says it's a very telling thing because it's basically like this guy in Davos deciding that, oh, I'm going to declare that we're independent in like a completely different country and that we're not bound by laws. And he has a whole metaphor about, oh, we have no bodies, like we exist in this ether, pun intended, of the internet, and we don't have a body. There's like one global consciousness, and it's really funny. There's a whole body of research about the fact that a lot of the early internet thoughts were really embedded in this like new age idea of like you're more like you're connected with like this big giant identity of like the world, and you're gonna be connected, which is really, when you read that text, it is very obvious that they really believed that it would be able to completely erase all the differences between all the people. And it's like, oh yeah, if I'm able to speak with someone on the internet, like if I'm able to connect and just share information, then all the problems are going to be solved. 40 years of internet later, like you do realize that if you put people on the internet, they just argue and send slurs at each other, which is pretty bad. And it was a very complete, it's weird to say that, but this was a completely unforeseen event. We never thought that helping people connect with each other with no sense of physicality or means that there's no customs. And that's very odd. Like there isn't very few amount of discoverability on the internet. You're either like completely anonymous or you're just posting your entire life on Instagram. And it's very difficult to have like layers of interaction with someone. So that's something that I really love about the Tonk team, is that they're really looking at at ZK and at cryptography as a way to mediate experiences between people on the internet that sort of look like the way you meet people like in real life, like in this physical sense. If you go into a bar, you can't hear all the conversations of everyone. You can see vaguely in the background that there's maybe like two people on a date, then there's a group of 4 people over there, and then you start talking to maybe one person and they reveal some things about themselves, and they, oh, you know what, like come with my buddies, like I'm gonna buy you a beer, and then you get let into this other group. If you like take this metaphor for how the internet works, it's either zero discoverability, which is group chats. Like I have zero discoverability about group chats. I do not know what the ZKM, where the ZKM Slack chan is, and I don't know how I can be let in. There's no discoverability for me about this. It's either so 0 or 100, which is I can go on Reddit or Twitter, and then I have direct access to 6 billion people at the same time. But there's not really this idea of, okay, maybe I can add these people to be let in, because sometimes you don't even know this thing exists. So there's sort of layers of interaction between people, which is coming back to the thing we were discussing about boundaries. I think it's interesting. I think it's a great affordance to have this. So one of the things I've been like wondering is there are alternative, like an example of this is you have alternative designs for Twitter. Twitter is a centralized entity. You have designs for decentralized Twitter, Farcaster, Blue Sky. You have another way to manage this system. But this is predicated on the fact that everything is public at all time. It's much more difficult to build something like a dating app in a decentralized fashion. And the reason is that you have data that has to be private or data that has to be revealed to a specific group of people. Because I do not want the world to know that I'm a Linkin Park fan. But I would really love to meet other Linkin Park.
Yeah,
Guilty as charged. Exactly. But I would really like to meet other people. So I would like to like emit this fact and be let in any group that has a test for me. It's like, oh, maybe you have like a proof that you're a real hardcore Linkin Park fan because you went to like 10 concerts and you got the signature on your wallet that you went to these concerts, and only the people at this concert could have this, and therefore your score up to there, and you can be let in. And that's something that really like clicked in my mind when I realized that it is not possible, or it's extremely hard to build a dating app in a decentralized fashion. Because you have this issue of discoverability and you have this issue of privacy. And it's not privacy in the sense that, oh, the government shouldn't know what I'm doing. No, it's more like, I don't want to reveal this about myself. And you have no decentralized way of doing this. So I'm very interested in the ability for cryptographic tools to allow better discovery on the internet, to create like experiences on the internet that really mirror the way you meet people in real life. So something in between like insulting people on Twitter and getting to know people in a group chat. There has to be, like we're talking about layers of decentralization, there has to be layers of discoverability, layers of privacy preservation. And I think that's interesting. There has to be something between a group chat and 4chan, basically, where everything is anonymous.
Definitely agree, and really liked how you phrased it with kind of separating those different layers of interactions, those different layers of discoverability for that privacy preservation. And yeah, really looking forward to the ways in which we can better discover like different groups, different communities, different people, almost mirroring the way that we meet people in real life. I
really encourage everyone to look at the work that has been done by the Cursive and the Tonk.gg team. They really are at the forefront of using like tools like NPC and others for discoverability, to solve like what they call like the big problem of the internet, which is how do you find people on the internet? Which is a weird thing to say, but it's still very difficult to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, if there's any other resources, Sylve and Ming, I know Sylve, you mentioned quite a few, or any other kinds of readings or any other kinds of podcasts, lectures that you recommend that maybe others can look at just as continuation of some of the topics we discussed. Yeah, if you'd like to mention them now, that would be really great. Or maybe some like closing advice, some last takeaways from this discussion that you'd like to mention.
Oh, yeah. If you're interested, yeah, I'm actually very interested in what you just mentioned. Discoverability is actually a very important issue for the decentralized world, because decentralized world is all about cryptography is about like hiding things, right? So sort of that's the at least that's the impression, right? It's yeah, but the world needs more connection and understanding, not more borders, boundaries. So that's I think that's my takeaway. So yeah, I really like this discoverability. This I would call it like a movement, not just one single app, right? And if you're interested in some of the conceptual thinking that I mentioned, uh, you can look at the dark economy. That's the idea that a framework I try to promote, which
Like
you
DAG,
see
like the graph.
the DAC, which means decentralized autonomous community instead of decentralized organization, because I think organization
Gotcha.
is like the traditional group thinking that have boundaries, right? Like keep people away with identity. So that's what I mentioned earlier. So we should abandon the idea of identity to embrace individuality. And also, I think the blockchain world, decentralized world, should more build around like communities, right? So put community into blockchain. So blockchain is this homogeneous world, right? Every blockchain sees the whole world as homogeneous, right? Same protocol, same consensus method to determine truth and everything. But like we discussed today, 50 Shades of Trust, we have what we now we have powerful programmable trust, right? We can build communities, put community back into blockchain. There was communities, we have a natural way to discover these connections and a different level of trust that's needed. And yeah, so yeah, look at these things and look at people who build around these new set of ideas.
My recommendation would be a great article called "On Trust Infrastructure" by Arnaud Schenk, and "Why You Should Build Trust Infra" by the Tonk.gg team. It's one of the things that really spoke to me in the sense that maybe we can use blockchain to create more truth. And that was really cool. Like, I would like to have more tools to be able to trust people. That's really cool. The closing remark is trustlessness is cool, but trust is pretty cool as well. I like trusting people.
Yeah,
Me
absolutely.
too.
And yeah, it's very great that we now have these tools to make trust programmable. It's not something that's fixed or not something that, you know, someone decided long ago that we have to like inherently just follow just because it was something established. But now we're able to make it a bit more flexible and applying it to, as you mentioned, so blockchains as these norm-making machines that can be extended via these cryptographic tools like ZK. But at the same time, we also have to look at some of the drawbacks of this, like what we discussed about setting up more boundaries. If we were to do that, this could potentially lead to a natural way to discriminate more easily. And what you mentioned, Ming, about some ways in lowering those boundaries, instead promoting individuality, and what you mentioned, Sylve, about promoting
Identity,
the sort of
yeah.
yes, identity, promoting discoverability in these new types of connections and forming these new communities is especially important. So those are my main takeaways from this discussion. But would really love to continue this some other time. Definitely a lot of insights to take away from this, and really enjoyed the conversation between you two today, Ming and Sylve. So thank you so much,
Thank you,
both of you.
Alice.
Yeah, thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.
Yep.